Hey, y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent here with Real Property Associates. Yesterday, I shared with you why sellers prefer a cash offer. And today, I want to share with you 5 things that you can do to compete with a cash offer if you are a buyer who needs financing. Now, the majority of home buyers actually need financing or a loan in order to purchase a home. So the vast majority, as much as you might hear in a place like Seattle where I'm shooting this video, you hear, yeah, there's cash offers, I got beat by cash. But the reality is a very small percentage of the homes are actually purchased with cash. So let's talk about, if we did run up against a cash offer, what some of those strategies might look like. And the first thing that you need to do if you're going to compete with a cash offer is to get your financing pre-underwritten with a local lender. There's a couple things wrapped in there, so let me unpack it. First of all, there are multiple levels of financing approval. There is the verbal approval from a bank when you walk in and you say, you know, I make this much and my credit's good, and they say, okay, great, you can qualify for a home up to this amount. The next step is to get pre-approved, which is when you go in and you send in documents. So the lender wants to see income, they want to see your assets, and they want to see your credit. So they're going to pull your credit, they're going to look at your employment history, they're going to look at your W-2s, they're going to see your bank statement. So they're going to do a more thorough vetting of you. And that's going to be the second tier. And then the third tier, and this is the one you want, if you're going to be competing with cashes, you want to actually be pre-underwritten, which means the bank takes all that information from the pre-approval and actually has an underwriter look at it and give their stamp of approval. The underwriter is the one in charge of saying yes or no on a file. So you want them to have eyes on it. And that's going to give a seller the most confidence. Now, before we get too far in here, we're talking about confidence, this piece here. And I talked about that in my video yesterday. The seller is going to be wanting to be confident, and they also want to close in their time frame. So the confidence piece here is huge on the financing and getting it pre-underwritten. The second part that I want to talk about of this section here is the lender piece. Who you're working with really does matter. And in the Seattle market, a seller tends to favor a local lender rather than a big named bank. So we're talking about the Bank of Americas and the Chases, BECUs. They don't typically get looked on as favorably as, say, a Guild Mortgage or a New American Funding or a TILA Mortgage, something that's more local based here, and you're going to have a local lender that you're working with rather than an 800 number. The second piece here that we're going to be focusing on is your down payment amount. You want to put at least 20% down if you can. Those loans, although the down payment doesn't usually matter in the end, if you're doing 20% or more, typically you're a more qualified purchaser as far as your capital, and there's less chance of things going wrong. Of course, a seller would like to see the largest down payment you could put if you were going to be competing with cash. So if you can put more down, do it. But I'd say 20% is your kind of minimum gold standard if you can. Of course, you can still go through all these other steps with a lower down payment, but that 20% down is ideal to kind of try to hit that if you can. The third piece that you're going to want to do is put down a very large earnest money amount. Earnest money is your good faith deposit. It's the collateral in the transaction. So a seller wants to see a large number there. They want to see that anyway, but if you're a financed offer competing against cash, you definitely want to have a strong earnest money amount. So typically 2 to 3% is considered a strong earnest money amount, and that's a percentage of the purchase price. So we're talking about $15,000 if it's a $500,000 purchase, $30,000 if it's a $1 million purchase, and so on. In Washington State, you're allowed to put up to 5% down. So you could, in theory, be putting a significantly larger chunk. If we're talking about $1 million, we're talking about $50,000 of earnest money. That's an additional $20,000 over somebody putting down a 3% earnest money amount. But that earnest money amount is crucial in competing with buyers in general, but also cash offers. You want to have a really strong earnest money amount. Now, you can also consider, and you want to do this as well, consider potentially releasing that earnest money or making it a non-refundable deposit. That's another strategy that we talk about in competing with multiple offers in general. But if you're competing with cash, again, it's something else you can do. As a cash buyer tends to actually do that more often because they have no skin in the game. They've pretty much said, I'm buying this house, there's nothing holding me back, so here you go, you can have the deposit early. So it's something else that you can do to put yourself in a similar category as a cash offer. The fourth thing I want to talk about is your, give me a sec here, your closing timeline, closing date. So these other things we've been talking about are more of the assurance that the seller has confidence in choosing you because you've made an offer that has strong financing and a strong earnest money amount, but you also want to be able to close in the seller's timeline. And usually that means closing quickly. A cash offer can close really in a few days, but typically a week or two is when a cash offer will close. Sometimes a seller doesn't actually want to close that quickly, so that timeline shifts back a little bit. But if you're a financed offer and you've been pre-underwritten with a local lender, you can usually close in 10 to 14 days. And that's going to put you right there with a cash offer. Even if you're going to close in 21 days or so, a couple days doesn't typically matter as much in the end. But if you're in that normal finance time, 30 to 45 days, you have no chance competing with a cash offer in today's market. The other piece, and I'd say this is I'm going to combine these together. You want to not have any financing related contingencies. And I would say you don't want any contingencies in general because cash offers typically don't. But if you want to compete, you can't have a financing contingency and you can't have an appraisal contingency. Now, the financing piece is going to protect you if for some reason you lose your job or if your situation changes. If you've gone through that pre-underwriting process, the bank is already really, really confident that you're going to qualify for financing, assuming that the appraisal from the third party comes back at the value of the purchase price. So the financing piece, if you were to waive that, you can be really confident, not 100% confident, but very confident if you've gotten that pre-underwriting process done. The second piece here that we're going to talk about is the appraisal contingency. And this is part of the financing contingency, or it could be separate. And this is where you're saying that your purchase is contingent on an appraisal at the value of the sales price. Now again, that's something else that a cash offer typically doesn't do. They don't have appraisals typically. And so if you're a buyer and you have an appraisal, good for you. It's a layer of protection for you and potentially for the bank, mainly is why they do the appraisals. So if your appraisal comes back 2 weeks later and it comes in low, you can potentially renegotiate the price or back out. And so the seller does not want to see that. They don't want to see an appraisal contingency or a financing contingency for that matter if it can be avoided. Now, if there's no other offers on the table, all of this doesn't matter. But if there are multiple offers and there's a cash offer that you're competing against, no financing contingency. And I would say no contingencies in general. So the big idea here is that if you want to compete with a cash offer, you need to set yourself up for success ahead of time. And that means getting your offer pre-underwritten with a local lender. That means putting at least 20% down if you can. The third part there is putting down a strong earnest money amount. Fourth, closing in the timeline the sellers want, whether that's quickly or a little bit slower. And then fifth, having no contingencies financing related. That's going to help you compete with a cash offer.